Shabbat Shalom, and welcome to the third and final This American Shabbat of the year. This week, we have Parashat B'chalotecha in 3 acts. Act 1. And the Lord said to Moses. Wait, what? Can you repeat that? Act 2. Miriam, Luria, and Midrash. But we're not talking about the law firm. Act 3. The distance between meaning and relevance. It's about 5 chapters. In our first act, Laura Hoffman attempts to understand why the editor of the Torah phoned in sick for this parsha.
Shabbat Shalom. The title of this week's Torah portion, B'chalotecha, is quite a mouthful to pronounce, and in reading and reviewing the portion, it has proven to be a lot to digest as well. Each chapter is seemingly disconnected from one another, sometimes causing whiplash with the abrupt transitions, and some chapters are more action-packed than others. There are plenty of exciting events in this portion that I could talk about, but being the language nerd that I am, I was drawn more to a familiar element of the writing in the Torah, the repetition. The Torah is full of repetition, and this portion is no exception. Why is the Torah so repetitive? What purpose does it serve, and how does it help people? We see this repetition right off the bat in the first chapter of this portion. It says, "The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, 'Speak to Aaron and say to him, when you mount the lamps, let the 7 lamps give light at the front of the lampstand.' Aaron did so. He mounted the lamps at the front of the lampstand, as the Lord had commanded Moses." If I were an editor, I would advise the writer to consolidate this into a single, concise sentence. But for some reason, it was thought that this needed the extra repetition of where exactly the lamps were positioned, and that this positioning was a direction from God to Moses. Later on in the portion, we see the same type of repetitive language. God tells Moses, "Let the Israelite people offer the Passover sacrifice at its set time. You shall offer it on the 14th day of this month, at twilight, at its set time." It then goes on to say, Moses instructed the Israelites to offer the Passover sacrifice, and they offered the Passover sacrifice in the first month, on the 14th day of the month, at twilight. Again, the Torah is really making sure we understand that the sacrifice was offered in the first month, on the 14th day of the month, at twilight. This is on top of the fact that we've already learned about the Passover sacrifice in great detail in previous portions. I'm not a seasoned scholar of biblical texts, but I have a feeling that these parts of the Torah were written this way for a reason. Why might it have been written this way? I have a few ideas based on my past and present careers. After college, I enrolled in the Academy for Urban School Leadership, or AUSL, a teacher training program in the Chicago Public Schools. After a year of student teaching and concurrent graduate school, I taught first grade for a year, realized teaching wasn't for me, and retired early. However, I learned a lot in my brief teaching career. One of the most important things I learned was the value of repetition, especially when it comes to small children. One of the first strategies we were taught was providing explicit directions and having students repeat things back to you to check for understanding. For example, when I ring this bell, stand up, push in your chair, and walk quietly to the rug. That's 3 things you're going to do when I ring the bell. Stand up, push in your chair, and walk quietly to the rug. Who can tell me what you're going to do when I ring the bell? At which point I would call on a student, or sometimes 2 or 3 in succession, to repeat the instructions back to me. It sounds excessive, and definitely felt that way at the time. But the idea was that repeating these things over and over would eventually make the instructions stick in the kids' minds and reduce all potential for confusion. So in the Torah, maybe if we're told several times where Aaron was instructed to position the lamps, it will be drilled into our brains and will not only remember, but obey the command too. Repetition is also an important element in my current field of work, oncology research. I work with doctors, nurses, statisticians, and numerous other team members to coordinate the development of research protocols, which are cohesive governing documents for clinical trials. You could think of it as a rule book for how to conduct a particular trial. Since there are several safety elements to keep in mind when conducting these trials, especially those involving new investigational drugs, it is not uncommon to list critical instructions in several different places within the document. For example, one page might say, conduct liver function blood tests on days 1, 8, and 15 of each month on treatment. Another page might say, since this drug might cause liver toxicities, liver function blood tests are required on days 1, 8, and 15 of each month on treatment. There is often also a nice clear calendar of required tests that includes those same instructions. In this case, it's not that people don't understand what they read the first time, it's that they might miss it, and another opportunity to encounter the information will help ensure that they see it, and for safety's sake, we definitely want them to see it. Perhaps this was the intention of the instructions for when to make the Passover sacrifice. Maybe if it's mentioned more than once, people will be less likely to do it on the wrong day of the wrong month at the wrong time of day, thus avoiding any potential consequences, like being cut off from their kin or bearing guilt. So maybe the Torah was onto something with all this repetition. While the writing may sound clunky and awkward to our modern ears, it ensures that people understand, remember, and do things how they are supposed to be done, leaving little room for error. It also benefits the giver of the instructions, in that even if the instructions are not followed correctly, it cannot be blamed on lack of clarity. Perhaps the repetition in the Torah was the biblical equivalent of the bolding and underlining we use for emphasis in writing today. If so, it certainly served its purpose. Thank you to Rabbi Minkus for the opportunity to think about and dissect this Torah portion, and to my study buddies, Joe and Miriam, for the excellent insight and discussion. I had a great time working with all of you, and I definitely learned a lot. Now, if you'll excuse me, I should probably go read the portion a few more times so I don't forget anything. Shabbat Shalom.
In our second act, Miriam Freedman Parks looks to our past as Jews and to hers as an individual in order to find her words, but also to give voice to the words of an earlier Miriam that our tradition had taken away from her.
And I have a confession to make. I have been to almost all of the This American Shabbat events at Rofer Tzedek. I have heard friends and acquaintances give beautiful Devar Torahs that were both wonderfully spoken and eloquently written. I did not expect at any point to be speaking to the congregation as a participant in this project. I've never actually given a Devar Torah. Despite years of theater training and the acquired ability to schmooze almost anyone within a 10-foot radius, the idea of writing a Devar Torah and speaking my own words in front of a large group of people absolutely terrifies me, and I've managed to avoid ever having to do it. That being said, technically I'm still not doing it because I can't see any of you, and this is entirely pre-recorded. It has been a surreal experience to study Parshat Behalotecha with Rabbi Minkus, Joe Reizner, and Laura Hoffman. As a group, we had 2 in-depth discussions of Parshat Behalotecha and a formatting discussion about how to write and deliver a Devar Torah, all on Zoom. A few months ago, the only Zoom I had ever heard of was my favorite public television show from the 1970s, completely run and organized by kids out of WGBH in Boston. Now I spend hours each day on Zoom as part of my work at Akiva Schechter Jewish Day School, attending meetings and announcements, teaching and learning from students, chatting with parents, and basically doing all of the things that we used to do in person before COVID-19. I've tried to find something in the Parsha to catch and hold on to, that I would want to study more in depth. There was so much to wrestle and think about in this tongue twister of a Parsha. Behalotecha moves so fast and has so much ground to cover. I've referred to my notes and a variety of supporting texts to illustrate 2 points in the Parsha. Those texts were the Eitz Chaim Tanakh, the Women's Torah Commentary, and the My Jewish Learning website. I've focused on the paragraphs that bookend the Parsha because there are 2 descriptions and events that I found very interesting. The portion begins with God dictating to Moses a detailed description of the menorah, which leads to various instructions that are given throughout Behalotecha, such as instructions regarding Passover, creating a council of elders, and finding leaders and influencers from among the people. Also, the incident at the end of the Parsha, leading to Miriam being struck with white scales, which illustrates some of the complaints of the people throughout the Parsha at an intimate level and how God reacts to them. The Israelites are told how to light the menorah, how it is made and patterned according to God's design, how to climb up to it, how to light it correctly, and in what order. This description seems clear and simple, and yet they merit almost an entire page of explanations in the Eitz Chaim commentary as to why all this detail is important. The one commentary I found the most interesting was an explanation that Rabbi Isaac Luria taught. It was that 6 of the 7 branches of the menorah illustrate scientific and academic disciplines, and that the 7th branch illustrates the light of Torah tying them all together. As someone who sees both secular and spiritual learning as complementing each other even when they disagree, I find this to be a powerful image. In Isaac Luria's mind, secular learning and faith are not rivals. Each has its own concerns and questions. Each complements the others. This is what has always attracted me about the study of Torah. It was because of this idea that years ago I was one of the founders of a queer study group that met weekly to discuss the Parsha against the background of our own experiences, ranging from Orthodox to secular, and that each of these backgrounds and study methods was valid and respected within the group. We met for about 2 years, cycling through each of the Parshiot in the Torah twice, discussing minute details of instruction and construction over Shabbat dinners before Friday night services. Indirectly, out of that study group and the synagogue above grew my relationship with my now wife of 20 years and my children, as well as our eventual membership in Rofei Tzedek, moving to Hyde Park, and coming to join Akiva Schechter. At the other end of the Parsha is the experience described in the Women's Torah commentary as the silencing of Miriam. Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Cushite woman whom he had married, for he had married a Cushite woman. As in earlier parts of the Parsha, the Israelites are complaining, and now it is not just the general rabble complaining about the lack of meat. It is those closest to Moses, his brother and sister, who are speaking direct Lashon Hara about his wife, seemingly about her race or ethnicity, without any evidence in the Parsha that his wife is problematic. Miriam and Aaron are described as fellow prophets, figures that have influenced Moses and the Israelite people from the time of slavery in Egypt until the end of this Parsha. God directly rebukes Miriam and Aaron for their complaints against the wife of Moses. Yet, since God has already punished Aaron by the death of his 2 sons for lighting a strange fire, in this instance God punishes only Miriam. Miriam is afflicted with what is described as white scales, interpreted as a form of leprosy, which is only healed after Moses cries out to God and Miriam is exiled from the camp for 7 days. In the Women's Torah commentary, it explains that not only is she singled out for punishment due to her complaints, but that she is also silenced in the Torah. She is described as a leader of the people, but after these voiced complaints and her exile, there is no record of her in the Torah again until her death. We know nothing additional of Miriam or her prophecy after the end of this Parsha other than Midrash, which is created from the imagination of other people. It is not really Miriam's voice, but other people's interpretation of what she thought, felt, and believed. Interestingly, despite Rabbi Luria's interpretation as the menorah as representing branches of both secular and spiritual learning, Luria wrote down very little of his teachings. His voice, like the voice of Miriam the prophet, was mainly a spoken voice, left to the transmission and interpretation of others. I thank you for the gift of time to study and speak about this Parsha. I hope that you will be able to read between the lines to find the nuggets of wisdom the Torah has to offer.
In our third and final act, Joe Reizner moves back and forth between the oddities of life and the oddities of Torah, and just how 2 parallel roads always seem to intersect at the boulevard of meaning.
Shabbat Shalom, friends. I'd like to begin by saying how much I miss our wonderful Rofei Tzedek community and how much I'm looking forward to being together again to share the ruach and hugs we've been without for way too long. I do realize it's probably easier delivering this talk to a silent, non-judgmental camera, but I would really much rather welcome or maybe risk your real-time reactions in the sanctuary. Thank you, Rabbi Minkus, for asking me to participate in the Behalotecha edition of This American Shabbat. The study sessions with you and my partners, Laura Hoffman and Miriam Freedman Parks, have been interesting and illuminating, and I thank all of you for helping to dial down my anxiety about doing this. Each Friday, I look forward to reading the reflections email Cantor Rosenberg sends, and I realized pretty quickly that I would often notice a correlation between the weekly parsha and something that was going on in my life. Though I do believe our lives proceed along some kind of path, I really don't believe in coincidences. As I love to say to my children when something unusual occurs which prompts the question, "What are the odds of that happening?" my response is, the odds are 100% it happened. I will admit that sometimes the connections between my life and the weekly parsha are tenuous, but at other times they're almost spooky. In reading and rereading this parsha, and reading it again, the thing that kept jumping out at me was the disconnect among the chapters. Plus, even with 5 themes in 5 chapters, a connection to my life remained elusive. The ever-changing narrative kept me a little off balance. In each chapter, I waited for the return of something familiar to tie things together, until I realized that Behalotecha was not a neat package just waiting for a bow on top. When I finally abandoned my need for a GPS route through the parsha, I did in fact recognize among the disparate accounts being told a definite analogy to my life as a whole, and also, more narrowly, to our collective life experience today. Generally, I think it's safe to say that one's life, and I know especially mine, is not a neat bundle of relatable experiences that move along a predictable timeline. It's really much more analogous to the fits and starts of Behalotecha, with varied and sundry events strung together over time to form the entirety of our life experience. While the themes of each of the 5 chapters seem distinct from all the others, they are in fact all part of the larger narrative of the Torah. Similarly, in retrospect, many chapters of our lives appear to be quite distinct and unrelated to each other. How do our experiences in nursery school relate to our experiences in college? And how do either of those relate to our experiences as parents or working professionals? On the surface, the answer may be not so much. But especially as we become older, and if we are open to examining our lives, we realize that all these disparate parts actually do have a role in making up the whole of who we are. During the many stages of our lives, it may be almost impossible to discern how those moments, that present, if you will, may reappear. Whether it is in a recognizable or totally hidden way, it is nevertheless part and parcel of our journey. I am reminded of one of the most meaningful and profound pieces of advice Jim and I ever received. When Hillary, our older daughter, was born, our pediatrician told us to consider her mind a blank slate and to try to write on it as many different and varied experiences as possible, even if we thought that at that moment she couldn't possibly take them in, let alone understand or remember them. Jim and I thought this was both the most incredible concept and also the most frightening. What if we made a mistake? What if we didn't do enough? Though it can never be proven, we're convinced that having taken that advice seriously with both Hillary and Jessie as infants absolutely had an effect on their lives. For the better, we hope. A more specific analogy to the present can be found in an early part of the Parsha. The Israelites are in the 2nd year following the Exodus from Egypt and are completing the construction of the tabernacle. We learn that, upon completion, the Lord lowering and raising a cloud over it would dictate the movement of the tabernacle. The Israelites had no idea how long they would travel with the tabernacle during any given leg of their journey, no idea how long they would rest when the cloud lowered again, nor how long their ultimate journey would be. They were, therefore, always kept off balance, never able to establish a sense of place, because they didn't know when they would be commanded to move on again. This seems to be a very close analogy to how we are living today, with our daily freedoms still substantially under the control of an authority or set of authorities, which we are, if we're law-abiding, helpless to defy. Many of us share, I think, a sense of not only being personally off balance, but of the world being out of balance while we wait for things beyond our control to dictate our actions. Unlike the Israelites, we are, for the most part, able to maintain the security that comes with a sense of place. However, the homes we have established over time have become, in some ways, less a manifestation of our security than our physical containment. At the same time, we share with them the unrelenting uncertainty of what comes next. How long will we have to travel through this unfamiliar and unforgiving territory until we are once again safely in a place of comfort and community? As William Falk recently wrote, any ordeal can be endured if you know what you must do to survive, and for roughly how long. We've certainly been given lots of information about what to do to survive, though the ability to use that knowledge does not fall evenly upon all members of society. I know that my family is and feels keenly the privilege we have to be able to avoid unnecessary exposure to COVID-19 only because others less fortunate than we are willing to, and in so many cases must, work through this time due to their economic circumstances. The analogy here to the Parsha is a little more opaque, though still applicable. When we think about complaining right now about anything having to do with our privilege, it feels a little bit like when the Israelites complained about only having manna to eat. It may have become standard fare to them, but according to the description here, it, quote, tasted like rich cream. Certainly not something to be taken for granted. Clearly, there are analogies between my life, our lives, and this Parsha. However, knowing what's ahead for the Israelites, let's hope there is no similarity between our current open-ended journey and theirs of 40 years. This has certainly gone on long enough. Rabbi Minkus, Jim and I want you to know how much we appreciate all your efforts to retain and maintain a sense of normalcy for all of Rodfei Tzedek during these unprecedented times. You've really done a terrific job. Cantor Rosenberg and Chuck, our deepest appreciation for the joy you bring into our homes each Shabbat. Na'aseh v'nishma has been pure sunshine penetrating through these very great times. Shabbat Shalom.